Up next is my favorite Planeswalker in this set, Dovin Baan. Although he does have some nice abilities, I really don't feel like he's that overpowered. Getting a creature -3/-0 is nice, but only really if you know that you're only going up against one or a few creatures. Against the whole horde, I don't think Dovin Baan is going to last too long, especially against the multiple servo/Thopter-like strategies, and that ability is only going to take out one of those creatures. Gaining life and drawing a card can be nice, but considering it's a minus ability, he's likely going to have a target on his head after you use that ability. However, that ultimate definitely can slow a player down. Unless your opponent has a lot of permanents with vigilance, or some other way to untap his or her permanents, you're likely going to outspeed your opponent and win the game very, very easily. So in short, giving him that plus really does make a big difference. While she was originally spoiled a long time ago, and I did mention her briefly back in, I think it was June or July, Shelley is finally here, and honestly, I don't think she's that amazing. I don't think she's bad either, but I was expecting a lot more for something so hype. However, like Metallurgic Summonings, I kind of feel like this will very likely be played in Vintage, considering you can actually copy a Mox for free, or any other sort of mana rock or mana generating artifact, even Black Lotus, before you use it. It's pretty darn sweet if you can get there. Of course, scrying is always nice, but it's not going to give you any card advantage potentially, and it will do damage over time, so I guess if you need that little extra range to get there, it's not too bad. I do feel that the ultimate, though, is a little unnecessary, considering it's likely you're going to have the amount of power or artifacts that you do need to win the game before you get to that ultimate, but it's nice to have nonetheless. Rashmi, the Eternity's Crafter, brings back an old flavor from an old set called Alara Reborn, aka the set where we had Cascade. Woohoo! Seriously though, this is actually pretty sweet, as every spell you cast will have a kind of Cascade-like ability, but if you're unable to cast a spell, you'll put it into your hand. The only other downside is that the spell goes with one card. It's not until you hit a card that costs less. So that's the only drawback, but it still could potentially give you a lot of value over time. It seems like Wizards really wants to make this vehicle thing more of an EDH thing, as they even gave us a general that really benefits from vehicles. Depola, the pilot exemplar, seems like she really wants to drive some cars, and will give you a lot of cards in the process. Although you could consider her a lord for dwarfs and vehicles when they are active, I really don't think this will see a whole lot of play in Standard. However, I'm sure there is someone screaming at this screen right now saying, I want to build this in EDH right now. Give me all the vehicles you got. I'm going to wreck your face with a giant car. On a side note, Kambal of the Console of Allocation seems like he's really good at hosing Storm decks. And if Storm ever becomes a thing, yeah, this guy will hose them. That's pretty much all you need to know. Contraband Kingpin seems like he's a pretty early game blocker for a control deck. Although most control decks don't really run too many artifacts, if they do, or if they find a way to incorporate them, the scrying one may actually be relevant. Other than that, he'll, I guess, give you one life whenever he blocks. I can think of worse things. Speaking of worse things, Cloudblazer really wants to be a Sphinx's Revelation, and therefore it's very heavily costed for such a small creature with flying. Personally, I feel like this will not be broken whatsoever, and it will be played nowhere near as much as Sphinx's Revelation, mainly because you could play Sphinx's Revelation whenever you damn well pleased. This is just kind of silly, and I really feel like it needed to be at least a 2/4 to be somewhat playable. I guess in EDH it will still see play as kind of a blinky thing. You could abuse it with some sort of blink effect, but I don't see this being played in Standard or Modern at all. Restoration Gearsmith seems like it's a decent value card for black and white decks. We were recently talking about Kea and how she could be used to keep blinking a black and white creature with a enter the battlefield trigger, and this might fit into a deck with a very similar premise. Considering that black and white do like to run a lot of creatures, this will likely see some play in EDH decks of that nature, but you never know, it could see play in something else as well. Although it likely won't see any play in any format outside of Standard, unlicensed disintegration can probably get you that additional range you need to get there if you play a lot of artifacts. Although, like I say, black is a color that doesn't really use that many artifacts. That may very well change over the course of this set, and if it does, then they'll have a nice valuable spell to power some additional way to get your creatures in there, and to do some extra range to finish off your opponent. Well, Tank Brawler seems like a red-green aggro creature that's really quite sweet. If you're able to have a constant flow of energy counters, you can make this thing have constantly 4 power as long as it's attacking. Pretty sweet, and if you're able to do this, I'm sure this card will see some play. Personally, I think Engineered Might is actually better for the second mode rather than the first, because I feel like if you do try to do the first one, you can get your creatures swept away by a removal spell or something like that. Plus, if you have a lot more creatures, that damage really does add up, so that could be very close to something like an overrun or something like that. Personally, I think it's kind of unfair that Imperial Voyager is one of the only creatures that gets energy counters whenever it deals damage. But I guess maybe we can wait till Aether Revolt to see what happens. Personally, I really like the energy mechanic, and I really hope that it is expanded on, not only in the Aether Revolt, but in future sets as well. Moving on to the lands, there are not that many lands, but we have some very good lands nonetheless. We have the enemy Scar lands, or Fast lands. They have several names, but they're here, and they're finally here, and we've been waiting for these lands for quite some time, and it's nice they finally have arrived. These lands will see play in Standard and Modern too, considering they actually, the friendly ones, still see play in Modern to this day. So this is a very nice addition, and these lands are very good. Get some soon, because they are going to be sweet. Honestly, I feel like Aether Hub is a really good land, just because of how often you can generate colored mana, as long as you have energy, and since energy is not too difficult to get, I really feel like this could have been very well be a rare. Sequest's Stash is kind of a weird land. I really feel like there are not that many graveyard synergistic cards in the set, but you never know, it could be a nice way to get an artifact you really need or get something back. And finally, we have the Inventor's Fair, which is the big land that is actually named after the big fair that takes place in this set. Honestly, this land has a lot of Metalcraft abilities, giving you life, adding you mana, and allowing you to fetch for any artifact you wish in your library, as long as you have Metalcraft. To be honest, this is actually a pretty exciting land, as there's not too many lands that do this, so I'm sure there are going to be lots of people who can benefit from a land like this. Especially for something, even in like EDH, and it probably will see play in some decks, and maybe even Legacy or Vintage, considering those are pretty artifact-heavy formats. The only downside to this land is it is legendary, so you really only need one, but some decks may want to run more if they know they really want to draw it or really function around it. And that was our set review of Kaladesh. Frankly, I really do like a lot of the cards and mechanics in this set. I think they are pretty stellar. I really do love the energy mechanic. I love the Fabricate mechanic, even though I feel like they really push servers and Thopters a lot in this set, and I really thought they ever did that a little bit, but it is what it is, I guess. I didn't think they need to have so many lords. I'm pretty sure someone is definitely going to try to build a tribal Thopter for the set. It's very likely to be a thing. All the pieces are there. But I really was not a big fan of the vehicles. In addition to that, I kind of felt like a lot of cards in this set really felt kind of bogged down. There were a lot of really gimmicky cards and a lot of real cards that couldn't perform just because there were some sort of restriction and inability to do things. I know synergy is a big part of this game, but there's a difference between synergy and just not really performing to one's potential. And I felt like there were a lot of cards that just cost a lot of mana and just don't really execute what you want. Of course, the set is still new, so there is some room for crafting, but just by looking at these cards, I can tell there's already several other options that are better than a lot of these cards. Like I said, from Mind Control and Thoughtseize compared to the alternatives in the set, just blow it out of the water if you wanted to play something like that. I really feel like this set reminds me a lot of Mercadian Masks, just because of the power level transition. I feel like power level has kind of sunk a little bit lower, and although there are a couple push cards, mainly in common and uncommon level, we're not really seeing anything too bombastic. Plus, another thing, like I said before, that really kind of bugs me is the addition of Masterpiece Inventions, which, although I love the cards that have been chosen to be in these slots for the Masterpiece Inventions, I really wish that they would just make these cards accessible to the whole community, and that the whole community could experience these cards and how powerful they really are. There's no reason to make them a secret rare that's not even playable. That's a crime for any standard player. Personally, I'm going to give this set a C minus, maybe even I'm on the verge of D plus. Like I say, I think there are some playable cards in this set. I think there will be a lot of cards that are played in Standard, and yeah, I really feel like because this set is so drastically different from the last block, or the sets from the last block, I think Standard will flux into its curve and kind of follow the rules it provides, unfortunately, even though there's some mechanics that I know I and a lot of other players are not really happy to see. Nonetheless, I just don't understand why all of these cards really need to be so, well, gimmicky and be so based off these one mechanics, because I just feel like, if anything, that restricts a card from being playable over time. Now, because of this, I just feel like these cards were just geared to be for draft, and that's why they seem so gimmicky, and that's why so many of these cards just don't really seem playable, or they could be playable, but there's better alternatives already out there. This really sucks, because once you're done with your draft cards, you're going to have to either pack up your draft and try to do it again, or you're never going to play with them ever again. Anyway, I really hope Aether Revolt kind of learned something from this, and that Wizards learned something from the response from the community, because I hope Aether Revolt is a lot better than this. I was kind of disappointed by a lot of the cards in the set. I don't think this is going to be one like of the historic sets that goes down in history as the greatest sets ever.